Hello everyone and welcome to QUOW, which is question of the week. So as well as your word of the week, you have QUOW, question of the week. And our word of the week, if you remember, was implicit. And the meaning? Yes, it's indirect. You can't see that information in front of you. There are no words that are used to tell you this. You have to work it out. So implicit is an adjective. And it may be that you're looking at implicit behaviour. So you look at the way somebody is standing or the expression of their face and you think, I think they're a bit annoyed. Because that's implicit. They don't actually say, I'm annoyed. Well, sometimes people do. So if I looked at somebody who was doing this, and in my head I was thinking, did he hit you? No, I don't know. Or this person might have said, no, he didn't hit me. Or this cat might have said, no, he didn't hit me. And in my head I'd be thinking, no, but you're steaming. And it's the threat of violence that would be implicit about being hit, wouldn't it? You can't actually see the violence. So thinking about implicit. So when we look at question of the week or QUOW, that's good practice when we're thinking about words in the English language. If they use the letter Q, generally, not always, generally are accompanied by U, which then makes the QUO sound. Because Q on its own makes a K sound, doesn't it? So if you just look at Q, the letter Q in the alphabet, that sound is K. But you very often in English words just need to know that sound QUO, because QO, QUO, QUOW. So QUOW each week is going to be thinking about our word of the week. So remember, you're thinking about using the word implicit when you understand the meaning, but it hasn't clearly been told to you. For this video, we're going to go through the inference for reading and then reach the speaking and listening QUOW, question of the week, at the very end of the video. So for reading, we're going to have a look at the statements made by the exam board and then go through level 1 and level 2 expectations, because we're working at level 2, and to work at level 2 assumes that you actually have all that knowledge at level 1, and it may be you do, but there are some gaps. So this part of the video is all about level 1, and for level 1 in your reading you have to infer. Yes, you're using inference in reading. And you have to infer from images, so pictures or maybe photographs. And your questions in your reading exam will be asking you to find meaning that's not explicit in the text. So that means you have to look at the piece of reading that you've been given, but the words won't be in there. The question is asking about. The question's asking you to look at the picture and then look at the information in the text and think, well, that's what I was reading about. What's suggested in this picture? So let's have a look at the question starters for level 1. So level 1, look at the image. What does the image suggest? So that might be a question on your reading exam paper for level 1. What does the image suggest? And it might be that they're looking at what's being worn in that particular image. You may have a question at level 1 reading that asks you, what does the image suggest about? So you would have a picture. Obviously it wouldn't be interactive in this way because it's going to be a picture or a photograph. And you might get asked a question like, what does the image suggest about how the teacher felt? Could be any question with, what does the image suggest about? In level 1 reading, you might get asked, what does the photograph suggest about? So are you noticing that pattern of the word suggest? Suggest means it's been inferred. There's no right or wrong answer, but you've kind of got to make sure that it fits with what you were reading in that exam, and that's what your examiner's looking for. So level 1, what does the image suggest? So remember, don't get caught out by that word image. It's very easy. It just means picture or photograph that you have with the piece of writing that you've been given for your reading test that we call the source document. You might get a question that says, what does the image reveal about? So reveal, it just means show you. That is not mentioned in the text. This is very important because when you get a question about a picture in reading at level 1, you've got to find the answer that's not actually in the piece of reading. Yes? So don't give an answer looking at the picture and thinking, oh yes, I read about that. It said something about the weather. Actually think about, what have I just read about? What is the picture telling me that gives me extra information? So when you're looking at inference, you're looking for extra information that you haven't already been given in writing. So at level 1, you might get a picture. Here's an example. You might get a picture about anything relevant to whatever the theme is for your reading exam. So this picture is about a waterfall, and if you had this type of picture, you might get a question that is multiple choice. So it might give you A, B, C, D, A, B, C, D, E, and it might say which of the following statements suggests that, or which of the following statements does the picture suggest about whatever it is that's in the picture. And you have to choose 2, and please do make sure you read the question correctly, because if you're being asked for 2 when you're given a multiple choice and you only choose 1, you'll get it wrong, even if that bit was right. Yes, so you've really got to make sure you know what your question is going to ask, and you could have a multiple choice question for reading level 1. So level 1, you're inferring from the images, you're looking for meanings, I beg your pardon, you're looking for meanings that are not explicit in the accompanying text. So that actually means when you do a reading exam at level 1, you're being expected to look for information and use your picture to identify information that actually isn't in the piece of writing that you've read. So I don't know if you could hear my cat there, but because I'm online identifying this information for you, my cat wants to take part, and because you don't know me and you don't know about my cat, you would listen to the noise and your inference might be, oh, he wants to get into the same room, and you might be right. But remember, with inference, you might also not be correct. So let's have a look at this stage of the video at level 2. Now we are doing speaking and listening, and I did say at the end of this video we'd look at the QUOW words for today, and that's your question of the week. But we began with reading level 1, and there is a difference between reading level 1 and level 2 when you're talking about inference. So in level 1 reading, you have to make inferences from pictures and photographs. In level 2 reading, that's different. So do you see the bridge there? That bridge between, I've already got that skill, I can look at a photograph or a picture and I can make some inference about that based on the theme or idea of the reading I've got. It's now moving into level 2. And in level 2, you have to identify implicit and inferred meaning in text. So that's really all about when you're doing your reading exam and you get what we call source documents. So source documents are the pieces of reading. And at this stage, you've already got the skill of inferring from pictures and photographs. So you're now going to be looking at inference for reading in a reading exam. That's what we tend to call reading between the lines. Well, you've got this because you can do this, and we're going to have a look at some of the phrases or the question starters that you might get at level 2 reading, and then we're going to move on to how might inference help us with speaking and listening. So what's implied by the use of the phrase? That might be asked, so make sure you understand the vocabulary implied. You might be given a question that states, look at section 1 of document 1, what is meant by, and in this particular one, what's meant by the phrase dog's breakfast. If you get that kind of question, make sure you understand that you are not answering the question, what is meant by this phrase. You're being asked, you're being asked, when you look at your piece of reading, look at the piece of reading where it mentions dog's breakfast. What is meant in that particular piece of reading? Do make sure that's very clear at level 2. You're not being asked to say what that phrase means. You're being asked to go to your reading text, find that phrase, look at the evidence around it and the information around it, and then decide what is meant by. So that's quite a lot of reading going on there. You might be asked, give one piece of evidence from the text that suggests, and remember it says a piece of evidence. It doesn't say copy out this sentence. So do make sure you understand what evidence is, and when we go on to reading, we'll have a look at how you extract evidence from the text. But that word suggests is very important, because that's what inference is about, isn't it? Suggesting something. You might get the question, paragraph 1 contains 2 paragraphs that mean the opposite of what they say. What are those phrases? Now, isn't it really interesting when we talk about questions in speaking and listening, we go for that bottom part of it. What's this? What's that? What's happening there? What are those phrases? We don't have the other part of it. When you're looking at level 2 reading, be aware that your questions often come at the end of what is a statement. That statement is really important, because that statement is telling you where to find the information to answer the simple question, what are? And in reading still for level 2, a little bit easier if you just get asked what are. So you might be asked what are 2 reasons for, what is 1 reason for, and it's always referring to your source documents. In the level 2 reading exam, you will not be asked to look at your reading. You need to get used to the terminology, source documents, and source 1 and source 2. And for those of you who do have some difficulty with words that sound the same, it doesn't mean sauce on your dinner, does it? So source. So when we use the word source, source, we're talking about where it comes from. Yes. So source 1 and 2, get used to saying source documents for reading. And it might say source 1 and 2 use different phrases to suggest. What are those phrases? So if you're asked to look at the source of 1 and 2, they're talking about 2 different reading pieces that you've been given, both reading source documents. So you have to get 1 phrase from one of the piece of reading and 1 phrase from the other. Don't take 2 from 1 document, because that will fail that question, and don't do just 1, because you have to be very clear what you're being asked, how many, and what you have to write down. And do remember, we talked about that word phrase. So think about the structure of the English language as letters, words, phrase, sentence, and then you're looking at some words that you might not know as well, clause, and finally sentences that you do know, which then go together to create the structure of your paragraph, which in turn structures your text. So don't write a sentence if you're asked for a phrase, because a sentence is a totally different thing. You might get asked, what are 2 things said by? But actually that person didn't say it, because it's not a speaking and listening task, it's in the writing. So you've actually got to go, it gives you a bit of a clue, you've got to go and find the speech marks in the writing and the person's name. Say, oh, what did that person actually say? And what that person actually said, what did it imply? So if I'd written something about Jane, about her working in education, I might have written it to tell you something about how she felt about it. I might have written it to tell you something about how long she'd been working in education. So there are lots of different answers that you might have, but do make sure that you know how to quickly find that information. Use your question to find the information. Which 3 words? So here we go. This goes back to words. So you've been asked for phrases, you've been asked for ideas, and now you're being asked for words. So do check that you know how many words you've got to find, and really important, where those words are going to be. So that part of the question is just as important as the end part of the question. For this one, it's about which 3 words in the second paragraph have a similar meaning to. So make sure that in your level 2 course you're actually looking at words, you're thinking about levelling up your words, you're certainly using a thesaurus, because that will be very useful, because you are going to be asked for similar meanings, and in this question you'd be given the word that has a similar meaning too, and you would be given that particular word or words, and you've got to know it. That's not something that you can just make up on the spot. You have actually got to be thinking about your vocabulary. So you're using inferential questions in speaking and listening when you're not saying what do you mean, because that's really very basic and we don't need to speak in that way to other people. To me, it doesn't sound as polite. If somebody in your class is given a presentation, you don't want to be saying, what do you mean? But it would be nice to ask, why do you think, and then you've listened to that presentation, what information did you take from it? Why did you think that? How do you know this? Can you please explain fully why you think? And can you see there that in that particular suggestion, the question begins with explain fully, but I wouldn't use those words to start off, because you're listening to a presentation from your classmates and you already know them and you want to be more polite to them. So could you please explain, or is it possible to explain? In speaking and listening, because that's what we're going to look at in the rest of this video at level 2, you're thinking about the presentation. So if somebody actually does their presentation, you need to ask questions at the end, and you need something about inference. You could actually use the word inference in the question. You probably won't, because there are other questions you can use. However, let's have a look at it. You could ask by using the same idea that the exam board takes, which is to provide a statement and then ask the question. So you made a strong inference about self-help in your talk. Can you share some specific strategies you use, or can you tell me some of the things you do for yourself? Because that's what specific strategies means, doesn't it? So you can actually take the approach of a very short statement and then a question. But remember, in speaking and listening, you haven't got it written down. So the shorter your question, then the more concise, so we use the word concise for short and precise. The more concise your question, then the greater chance you have that the person you're talking to will be able to pick up all that information in one go and then answer it. Because remember, you're going to be in that situation where someone's going to ask you a question, you don't know what that question is going to be, and you've given a talk and you've got to collect your thoughts and answer that question. And you can't just say, well, give me 10 minutes and I'll have a think about it and then I'll come and tell you. All right, you have to have an answer. So we will do a lot of practice in speaking and listening about how we do that. But if you do choose this type of question, please make sure that your statement at the beginning is very short. So in speaking and listening, inference questions. It's all about either what the presenter thinks the outcome will be, and that's what you're asking the question about, or what you think the outcome is from what the presenter said. So it's really important that you know that there are no right or wrong answers when you're thinking about inference. And it's really a 5-step process. So you don't do this consciously, you do this unconsciously. So if you've never used this process and you don't know it, really think about, where am I on that point of 5? Am I already doing up to 3, or am I doing 1, 2 and then asking the question? So first step is, what's your inference? So you've listened to that information. What have you worked out that actually hasn't been said in the talk, but it's made you think particular things? The second step is, what information from the talk did you use that made you think that? The third step is a very important step. If you listen to that talk and that's what you think, how good is your thinking? Do you need to clarify it? Are you absolutely happy and you know that you're thinking exactly what that evidence suggested? And that leads you to number 4. Do I really need to change my thinking? And with number 4, I'd be thinking, do I need to challenge my thinking? Do I need to ask a question that takes me back to number 2, which is all about, I've got a bit more information now, so I've got some more ideas about what I'm thinking. And the 5th step, do you need to ask your presenter a question to help you fill in the gaps or support your inference? That's very, very important, because that's why you're asking a question that's all about what your inference is, or maybe what the presenter's inference is. So think about how you think before you reach to your question. So you can ask direct inference questions, and they use the words infer, suggest or imply. I think it sounds more natural to use the word suggest or imply, but really think about it. If you use infer, it sounds really formal, doesn't it? And suggest can still be quite formal depending on the words around it, but I like the word suggest. What does that suggest? But remember, if you say, what are you suggesting, the tone of how you say it is really important. Because if you say, what are you suggesting, it sounds as though you're really challenging. What does that suggest is questioning. If you would use the word imply, that also has some connotations. So do know the difference between denotation and connotation. So denotation, that's the meaning of the word that you can get from the dictionary, and connotation is the different ways in which that word can be perceived, or the way in which that word makes people think. So when you're using the word imply, you're suggesting that that person has something hidden about what they think that they haven't told you. And that's why I love the word suggest, because for me it is suggesting it's quite a neutral approach to a question. You can decide which word you would use, because you're not me, and we all have to be able to infer, which we do. So this video is QUOW, which is question of the week. So this part of the video is going to look at some questions and decide on a question of the week for our keyword of the week. So based on that information, what can we infer about next year if someone's telling you something about the progress of something so far? Remember those questions that are really good. How, what, why, where, who. They're all really inference questions, aren't they? Because you're going to get some extra information. And inference questions lead to more information. That's what you're doing. You're saying, you've given this talk. That was really great. I just wanted to know about this. How did that meet with that? How did that fit with that? Please don't say her. I know that's there on the picture there, but I wouldn't even use her if I was in an informal situation. So who, what, where, when, why, maybe how. You're getting more information when you're focusing on inference. So you might ask, oh, what's made the biggest impact on you if you're given a suggestion of things? You might say, how did you determine, and remember determine means work out, how did you work that out from the information you've just given us? So that's a lovely QUOW question sentence, because you can move that about with anything. And before we say goodbye, let's go back to our QUOW question, our question of the week. Using your own way of speaking, think about how you would ask, how did you determine, whatever it is, from the information that you've just given us. So you can't actually fill in the gap in that question till you know what the talk's going to be about. So all you're really thinking about is, how would you ask, how did you determine? Would you change that word? Would you add a little bit in? And would you change the phrase from the information? And that's our question of the week. And if there's anything that you weren't sure about, please pause the video or rewind. Bye now. Adios.